Hi, my name is Jenna Whipple. I teach 5th and 6th grade language arts, and I will be talking about the impacts of Write Talks on reluctant adolescent writers. I chose this intervention and research study because I teach writing every day, and I see students that are reluctant and struggling writers, and I want ways to help them improve their writing achievement and attitudes and motivation to write. The problem: struggling writers are often not motivated. There are numerous reasons that could impact their motivation to write, which I will discuss a little later. But writing is such an important skill that is often overlooked by reading and math. So it's important to remember that writing is an essential skill that students will need going forward. With that in mind, the National Assessment of Educational Progress noted that writing is one of the most difficult tasks to teach and to help improve student skills on. So, teachers need to have strategies and ways to help motivate our struggling and reluctant writers. Students become reluctant towards writing when they lack motivation or confidence in their writing. So, let's talk more about that. So, the inability of American students to master writing is a growing concern in the field of education. On the National Assessment of Educational Progress 2012 report card, 1/3 of students in grades 8 through 12 were considered proficient in writing. That is a huge chunk of students that are not considered proficient. Writing is a complex skill that is built upon, and students need to develop those skills along the way because if they don't learn to be capable writers, they will experience numerous challenges in education, their careers, and other avenues in their lives. Students experience failure or negative experience is one of the reasons that students can become reluctant writers, which also impacts their motivation. So, in primary school, writing is a creative process. Students enjoy it and they get to feel competent. But as they move through school, writing becomes more complex and challenging, and students' beliefs about their abilities of writing begin to decrease, which can lead them to become reluctant writers. Teacher evaluations can impact the confidence of students. If students feel like they are good writers, but then they receive lots of feedback that's not positive, or their work is really marked up, or they feel the teacher is just looking for every single mistake in their writing, that can make them reluctant to write. That hits their confidence hard. Students do not feel respected or cared for by their teacher. This goes back to the basics of teaching, building those relationships with students. If students feel cared for, they are motivated to write when they feel their teachers care for them. One more thing I did not note here about reluctant writers: if writing tasks are boring and repetitive and they don't connect to the real world, students and if they can't see how it applies to the real world, students can also become reluctant or unmotivated writers. Um, there is limited, there are limited studies to best teach writing instruction and how to help improve writing instruction, but there are a couple studies out there that have these interventions in mind. So the first one is multi-component motivational support systems. This is a study that talked about 3 interventions rolled into one. So timing, self-evaluations, verbal praise, and display of high scores. All of these were rolled together, and there was improvement in quality and length of student writing. However, there are a couple drawbacks. One of them is there's no focus on the grammar or structure of the writing. It's solely based on the total words written. Another drawback is that if there's success in one part of this intervention, because there are 3 rolled together, it cannot be considered a successful intervention because all 3 of those are considered one entity. The next intervention is self-monitoring. Self-monitoring is a way for students to evaluate whether they are meeting a standard or benchmark by documenting their own outcomes. This gives students the power to track their learning and be able to change their actions to help improve their motivation. Self-monitoring has a plus in that it can be implemented into any content or any classroom. It's not specific to an intervention. It does provide immediate feedback, which a lot of research talks about the need for students to have that immediate feedback so they can instantly correct what they are doing wrong. But the drawbacks of self-monitoring is that there wasn't improvement in the mechanics of student writing, and there were no major impacts on skilled writers. As I've mentioned, there is no significant amount of research available when it comes to the best writing instruction and best interventions to motivate writers. In terms of my writing intervention with the Write Talks and self-monitoring, there's limited to no research on the effects. So this is a completely first study of its kind. The purpose of my quasi-experimental design study was to examine whether or not reluctant sixth grade writers' motivation to write would increase based on the Write Talk intervention with self-monitoring. This research could impact reluctant writers and provide ways to increase their motivation and achievement for writing. In terms of how this research could impact me, I do teach language arts and I teach writing, and I would love to have strategies and ways to increase student motivation and achievement and help those reluctant writers become better writers. So my hypothesis, it was predicted that reluctant writers who participated in Write Talk interventions would have better writing attitudes and achievement than those who do not have the intervention. My methods, all of the sixth grade students were given a Likert scale writing attitude questionnaire, which consisted of 10 questions where they rated their numerous questions about, am I a good writer? Do I like writing? I like to write for fun on a scale of 1 to 5. They were also given a written expression probe scored using total words written. So from those initial assessments, I selected 14 students chosen from 29 males and 38 females. The average range for my students is 12 and a half. Our school is 51% free and reduced eligibility. Of my 14 participants, 8 were free and reduced. 8 of my participants were considered Caucasian and 6 considered Hispanic or non-whites, and none had IEPs. The materials, notebook, pencil. I needed to have adult community members with a piece of writing that they wrote for the intervention, written expression probe, writing attitude questionnaire. The procedure, like I said, all sixth grade students were given the written expression probe and writing attitude questionnaire. The experimental group was chosen based on attitude scores of less than 70% and less than 58 total words written in 4 minutes. The control group had attitude scores of less than 70% because I wanted to see if we could improve their attitudes, and greater than 58 words written in 4 minutes. The procedures consisted of the experimental group began participating in Write Talks, which were in small group settings during win time, which was an average of 63 minutes, 1 to 2 times a week. Community members came into the classroom with a composition that they wrote, and they shared it with the students and talked about it, and the students were able to discuss and ask them questions. The students participated in 4 Write Talk interventions. During this time, the control group continued language arts instruction. In terms of data, the independent variable was the presence or absence of the Write Talks. Dependent variables were the writing achievement and writing attitudes. 4 independent t-tests were used to compare the means of the control and experimental groups. So pre-intervention, post-intervention scores of control and experimental groups were compared to see if there were any statistically significant differences between the 2 sets of data. So in terms of results, findings did not confirm the hypothesis that the Write Talk interventions would improve both student motivation and achievement. If we look at the writing attitude questionnaire, the t-test results from the pre-intervention of the control and experimental group showed that they were similar. The control group scored 1.286 more points than the experimental group on the writing attitude questionnaire. So if you look at the chart, the line chart, you can see the black is the control group. Their mean increased in their attitudes. So did the experimental group. But Results from the analysis of the t-test did not show a statistically significant difference on the pre-intervention, post-intervention questionnaires, which then indicates that the intervention did not show a difference in students' attitudes towards writing. If we look at the written expression probe, the t-test showed the control and experimental group started off differently. The experimental group wrote 19 more words, or 19 less words than the control group, so there was quite a bit of difference in their written expression. The control group on the post assessment increased their mean total words written by 4, and the experimental group increased their total words written by 2. So there was an increase in their written expression. But if we look at the t-test analysis of the pre-intervention and post-intervention written expression comparing the control and experimental group, there was an increase in the written expression. However, we started with an initial difference. So there wasn't a statistical change there. But if we look at the Co and D values, there is a significantly greater value in the post-intervention. But there's not conclusive evidence to support the hypothesis, even though there was improvement. The discussion, again, it was predicted that the reluctant writers who participated in the Right Talk interventions and self-monitoring would have better writing attitudes and achievement than those who did not. The results did not confirm this. Vygotsky's cultural theory provides connections for the use of interventions that involve interactions and construction of knowledge from mentors, peers, or more knowledgeable others. One of his cognitive developments, more knowledgeable others, describes how children can learn from someone who displays a higher level of understanding than they do, which was why I wanted community members to come in, because they are more knowledgeable others and they have more understanding of what they use writing for. The Socio-Cultural Theory explains that cognitive development is developed through social interactions as well as scaffolded instruction in the zone of proximal development while knowledge is constructed. So all of these interactions that kids are having, they are developing and learning and increasing their knowledge. The socio-cultural theory also puts emphasis on connecting writing to the real world, which is what the Right Talk was trying to do, was providing interactions with a more knowledgeable other, as well as putting emphasis and connecting writing to what goes on in the real world. Even though the students were able to see or were able to be given connections to the real world, it did not result in an increase in participation or in participants' attitudes toward writing. They also participated in discussions with these working adults to really add emphasis to the value of writing in the workplace. So some of the limitations: pairing mentors and writers. So finding people who are available in professions that do write. Depending on where you live, it could be easy, it could be hard, but that's something that a future researcher would have to take into account. What is their profession? What kind of writing compositions do they have to bring in to show the kids that writing is valuable? Another limitation was time. I had 45 to 60 minutes during WIN, and that would have been the amount of time I wanted to use, but with weather and schedule changes, those impacted the length of the Right Talks, and participants were not always able to share the total number of words that they had written in the reflecting time. The implications: researchers have found that self-monitoring strategies are beneficial to students and help them become more aware of their writing abilities. There have been no prior studies to using Right Talk interventions in connection with self-monitoring strategies. Real-world connections via Right Talks yielded results that were inconclusive to indicate improved writing and motivation and achievement. So implications: writing is necessary to be successful Writing is a necessary component to be successful academically as well as an active citizen in the global economy. Being able to communicate in any setting, verbally or written, is crucial for adults and students to be successful. And a huge deterrent to students' ability to write is their attitudes to writing, which can impact performance. So, things that teachers can do is focus on positive writing components, interesting writing topics, showing respect to the students, conferencing one-on-one, getting students motivated and interested in writing is a way to help them become proficient.